Hello everyone, my name is Arco and I'm gonna talk about a problem that I've been working on for the past years, which I call washing. And no, I don't mean washing laundry, I'm referring to the metaphorical act of polishing the external appearance in order to conceal flaws, errors and problems. The reason that I chose the shortened form of washing is to avoid any potential racial connotations carried with the full term of whitewashing, plus it allows me to generate new variations such as greenwashing, social washing, and science washing. In the next 10 minutes, I will try to explain what it means to wash over reality, why it is a problem, why we do it, and what we can do about it, giving various examples from business, policy, politics, and science. So where did the term first arise? I know this is somewhat of a heretical question to ask in for a Paparian crowd. Nevertheless, in this specific case, I think that it serves as an illuminating starting point. The first reference I found appears in the Bible. In this passage, Jesus confronts the Pharisees and scribes. They were a religious elite, interpreters of the law. Now, Jesus was not a fan, and this becomes quite clear in the following passage. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and every kind of impurity. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, first, Jesus knew how to insult people. The man didn't just call religious leaders hypocrites, he called them fancy-looking graves. I think that's some pretty poetic cursing. But second of all, and more importantly, are some of the reasons that Jesus gives for calling them hypocrites. I've highlighted two which I think carries the most explanatory knowledge in them. First, they tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. In other words, they're not so much focused on solving problems as they are on just passing them on to other people. Second, for you pay a tenth of mint, dill and cumin, and yet you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. In other words, they're not so much focused on the underlying spirit of the law, but more so on the explicit letter of the law. Now, what is interesting about these two components is that they don't tell you what morality is or ought to be. Instead, they reveal something about the wrong attitude that one can have towards rules, norms, and moral problems. Second, and also, they align perfectly with Paparian epistemology. First, imposing problems onto others obviously is a problem because when we insulate ourselves from direct feedback, we are unable to error correct. Plus, it obviously assumes there's such a thing as instruction from outside the structure. Second, elevating the letter above the spirit is identical to elevating one's theory above reality. And given that all our theories are fallible, they're conjectures, we basically turn our theories into dogma. And now, we have, with these two components, I think we have a good moral theory of what it means to be a moral hypocrite. And we also see why it is a problem. Why? Because washing suppresses the growth of knowledge. Now let's consider some concrete examples. Greenwashing happens when we elevate the letter of a green ideal above the underlying spirit. A perfect example is Dieselgate. For those of you who don't know, Volkswagen and many other European car companies built a software that could detect when the car was undergoing official emissions testing. It would then temporarily switch the engine into a different low pollution mode, which meant that the same car in real driving conditions could emit up to 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxides, thereby elevating the letter of the law, passing the tests, above the spirit, clean air in the real world. By the way, many people think that Dieselgate was a result of economic greed. I think that explanation is wrong. It was a result of central planning. If you're interested to hear more about that story, you can watch the second episode of my documentary, which will be out in a month. All right, social washing. An extreme case of social washing was Stalin's forced collectivization. The intended spirit, or goal, to modernize agriculture and a classless society was used to justify the means, the letter, high grain quotas set from above. But when the farmers failed to meet the quotas, Stalin didn't correct the letter, his central planning theory. Instead, he corrected the farmers, seizing their land, including their food, and triggering the Holodomor famine that killed millions. Stalin also infamously airbrushed his political rivals from pictures in order to rewrite history. Again, instead of correcting his moral theories on how to engage with others, he falsified reality, elevating his theory above reality and human life. Lastly, science. Science washing happens when we elevate what we think is the letter of science, such as explicit procedures, such as gathering data, making predictions, and running mathematical calculations, above the underlying spirit, a commitment to truth. A perfect example of this is Paul Ehrlich. After his theories had been repeatedly refuted, he continued to warn of imminent mass starvations, resource collapse, and a population crisis for decades. And his science washing becomes even more clear when we see how he responds to criticism. This was him responding, "If I'm always wrong, so is science, since my work is always peer-reviewed." Again, a clear example of elevating what he thinks is the letter, peer review, above the underlying spirit, a commitment to truth, honesty, and doubt. So, why does it happen? Why did Volkswagen install cheating software? Why did Stalin rewrite history? And why did Paul Ehrlich continue to hold on to his catastrophic theories long after they had been refuted? And more broadly, why do we take the very thing by which we can solve our problems, our ability to create new explanations, and use it instead to hide those problems? A tempting answer is to put all the blame on the environment. It's the culture, the incentives, the system, they cause us to misuse our creativity. And this is clearly true to some extent. If criticizing a communist regime gets you sent to the gulag or executed, we can easily imagine people will be making very different moral calculations compared to when you live in a society that rewards open criticism. And yet, even in the most closed, repressive societies, people still choose to confront problems openly. Galileo, after being forced by the Inquisition to recount his heliocentric explanation, continued his scientific work in secretly, elevating his curiosity above official doctrine. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, after surviving 8 years in the Gulag, wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Breaking with his own Marxism, he exposed the horrors of the Soviet system, knowing full well that it could cost him his freedom. Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of one of Hamas's founders, despite living in one of the most ideological environments on earth, secretly started working against them, elevating moral truth over his own safety. In the end, it is not the environment that determines whether the problem of washing grows. What matters are our moral theories. Do we elevate the letter above the spirit, the end over the means, the model over reality, certainty over problems, social safety over moral truth? That is the moment we wash over reality. Now, what I want you to take away from this story is this. Just because your environment incentivizes a particular output does not mean it is okay to comply. When you think that something is wrong with a norm, an ideal, or preset goal that is put before you, you have the responsibility to make that problem known. Not because you are right. You are most certainly not right. Rather, it is because every problem that we encounter with norms and ideals is a signal. Either the norm is faulty and you have something to tell the world, or the norm is correct and you have something to learn. It is only by making these problems explicit that we can prevent our knowledge from growing sideways. Thank you. Questions?
I have a question, which I'm sure we're all wondering. What is the thing that you really care about here? What's the thing that you've seen that is heartbreaking to you?
I think we can use our creativity to appear more moral, more social, wiser. We can also use it to seem more happy. I'll leave it at that.
Any more questions? Thank you for a beautiful talk. I have a question about the law. Would you say that if you deem a law to be not morally correct, you have a moral responsibility to advocate for Two-part question. First, to break it, and second, to advocate for changing the law.
What is the question? Which one?
Suppose you regard a specific law as immoral.
Yes.
The two-part question is, first, should you break it now, according to the moral system that you just described? And second, should you advocate for changing the law?
So, I think if exposing a problem leads you to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, if he openly exposed what he was doing, writing the book, he would have died. The problem of washing is that it suppresses knowledge growth. If you die because you expose a problem, that is not a very smart move to expose a problem. So I think there's an infinite amount of ways in which you can creatively expose the problems with norms, ideals. I have a friend who works at a government, and he's an Austrian economist, and he thinks what they are doing is not very wise. He's writing a book and using his experience to fill it with content. So yeah, I guess there's multiple ways in which you can expose problems.
All right, thank you, Arco.
Thank you.